So hi everybody and welcome back to the C++ tutorial series for absolute beginners. This is video 340 and in this video we continue with our examples. We have already talked about this here. We started here with the temporary object and then we jumped here to the constructor of A. And now we continue from here and I'm using the compiler explorer for this one. So we have already talked about that the first line is printing out this trying to move A, okay, and now we jumped here to the constructor and the constructor has also here an output and we are seeing this here, the constructor A called, and that was the call with the temporary object. All right, let's talk a little bit about the struct, because what we learned so far here in C++ that we can create types in different ways. One way is with a struct, one way is with a class, and there is one more way which is with a union. And what was the difference again about these types? Try to answer, and now I say it. Struct here has public access specifier. I hope you know this. So what does this mean? These variables here are public. And if this would be a class, this would be private. This is so one of the main differences. And there is one more difference perhaps, which you should know. Structs here, but it will work normally with classes as well. But most time they use structs. They use just to put in many variables and then later they make an aggregate initialization, which means they put just variables in it, no constructor, destructor or virtual function, anything, just variables, and then they use this as a data container. This is very common in general use. This we should also know by now, but anyway, we continue a little bit here on. So then what is the next step? So we have constructed now with the constructor this temporary object. So then the compiler will jump from here back to this place here and will use this temporary object as an argument for the function here. And again, if you are using an IDE, hover with your mouse over it, and then you can see the tooltip, what this F is, or jump to declaration, jump to the definition, so you can see it directly. But again, I have it not, so I just scroll up, and here is our function. Let's talk about this function a little bit. Okay, and we have here this function parameter. We call it here when we have it here as parameters, but when we have it here, which we are passing in to this parameter, we call this part here an argument. So this is one, can confuse starters a little bit, because normally it's not the same thing, but we are using the same place, because arguments is that what get passed in, and the parameters is that what it is receiving, what get passed in. Okay, the next thing here, then when we pass this temporary object from here to here, there is also a, I just mentioned we pass in, but there are different kind of passes. One is the pass by value and the other is, I hope you know it, pass by reference. What we have here, let's watch it. We have here a temporary unnamed object, which is passed here by what? By value. So what does this mean, pass by value? First of all, when we compare it to the pass by reference, means all time we have here a reference object instead of a directly created object. Reference object means you have created it before, then you have here a reference type, which means it's pointing more or less to this first created object, and you just pass here this reference then in this parameter list. But here in our case we have created this object directly here, right? So it is not a reference, it is just created the real object, which is temporarily unnamed, and it lives here. And then we pass this direct object here. So that's why we have here a pass by value. And what does pass by value mean? I hope you know it. It means we make a copy. And when we compare this with pass by reference, let's say we would pass here a reference from here to here. What does this mean? Pass by reference means we are not making a copy. We are passing a reference which is accessing the original object, and here we have no copy. But before we go on here with this parameter list, let's repeat a little bit this function. What kind of function we have here? A function with a return type. Where is the return type? Here is the return type, which is again a, which is our struct here. Okay. And when we have a function with a return type, what is important? Important is that you are using this word return. This indicates also we have a function with a return type. Okay. Then what you should also know is there could be not only one return, we could have different kind of returns. I mean different returns. For example, nested returns when we have an if statement, then, or we can check a condition, for example, and then return it there and there. And that will be also important for optimization cases with the compiler, but I skip this part right now. But we are going back now to the function parameter here. So we have figured out that we have passed this temporary object here by value here. So next question, what happens here? What happens here in the parameter list when we pass it by value? I mentioned before we create a copy, but what does this mean, we create a copy? And the answer is here in the parameter list, this named variable a is created. All right, and creation means it will be constructed. Okay, constructed. And when we hear this word constructed, we think most time about the constructor. But is this here the case that we will use here the constructor? And when we watch here to the output, no, there is only one time a constructor called. And this constructor was only called when we have created this temporary object. So here we pass it in, this variable a is here constructed anyhow, but not with the constructor. Okay. But when we pass this argument, this temporary object from here, this a must be constructed anyhow. How is it constructed? And to understand this again, we have to do all time the same thing. We are jumping to the type. This is, in my case, our struct a. And then we think about it, what this argument is and what constructors we have here and can bind to this argument. So what constructor can bind now to this r value? First of all, the normal constructor can't bind to an r value because we have no parameters to accept a pass. We need something, a parameter which can accept something passed in, and this constructor has it not. And we need also something that pass in the type a, because you can see we have created here a temporary unnamed object with the type a. Okay, so the constructor is it not. So, but here the other ones, we have now two constructors, and when we watch now the types, yes, a ampersand is accept an L value. This here double ampersand accept an R value. But careful, we learned something already with the copy constructor here. Is a special case. When you use a const, you can also bind to an R value, which means in our case, we could in theory use this one here, or we could use now this one here. So, and the question is now, what is used? Is the copy constructor used, or is it the move constructor? And again, we go here to this one and let's check. Okay, this is a temporarily unnamed object, an R value. Okay, I can use both. And the question here is, what do you think? And I hope you think the move constructor is used. And the question here is then why? Because like I said before, normally the compiler could use both. And the answer is because the compiler prefers performance, that it is so programmed that when the compiler has the option to use a copy or move, it will all time try to also higher priority is the move because the performance is then better, just because that. But important here to note is the constructor cannot all time use move. For example, there is any requirement not met, then we have our copy constructor and that will be then used instead. That's why it is so important to have a copy constructor defined as well when we define a move constructor. All right, so that's enough for this video, and like all time, if you have any questions, write in the comment section. See you in the next video. Bye and good luck.